The alley was dim, lit only by a flickering streetlight, and Margaret Chen stood in the center of a circle of young men, her silver hair catching the amber glow, her weathered hands steady at her sides, and though her heart pounded with the weight of 68 years, her voice was calm, almost gentle, as she said, "I warned you I'm a combat master," and for 2 seconds, the world held its breath before the tallest boy, Marcus, threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing off the brick walls, and the others joined in, their hoodies shadowing faces too young to carry such hardness. But Margaret didn't flinch, didn't step back. She simply waited, and when the laughter died down, she moved. It wasn't a punch or a kick, nothing aggressive or threatening, but a single, fluid forma, crane stance from the discipline she'd practiced for 50 years, her body shifting with such precision, such unexpected grace, that the mockery drained from their faces and was replaced by something else, curiosity, respect, perhaps even awe, and in that silence, heavy and profound, Margaret saw not threatening gang members, but what they truly were, lost children, angry and afraid, searching for something to believe in, just as she had been searching for purpose ever since the funeral 3 months ago when they'd lowered David into the ground and buried half her heart with him. She had moved to this neighborhood out of necessity, not choice. The house she and David had shared for 40 years, the dojo they'd built together in the backyard, where hundreds of students had learned discipline and honor, had become too expensive, too full of ghosts, and the tiny apartment above the laundromat on 7th Street was all she could afford on her pension. But she hadn't expected the neighborhood to be so broken, so full of kids like these, clustered on corners, eyes hollow, futures uncertain, and she certainly hadn't expected them to follow her home tonight, their footsteps echoing behind her as she carried groceries, their voices sharp with challenge. "Hey, old lady, you lost. This ain't your neighborhood." And when she turned to face them, something in her, some flicker of the woman she used to be, had refused to show fear. Margaret had been a fighter once, not in streets or rings, but in the disciplined world of Tang Soo Do, earning her 6th-degree black belt before she turned 40, teaching alongside David, their dojo, a sanctuary for troubled youth, military veterans, single mothers seeking strength, anyone who needed to believe they could be more than their circumstances. And though age had softened her reflexes and arthritis had claimed some flexibility, the core of who she was remained unbroken, and these boys had awakened it. "You think that's funny?" Danny, the youngest, maybe 17, asked, his voice cracking slightly, trying to sound tougher than he felt. And Margaret lowered her stance, meeting his eyes with a gentleness that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "I think you're all trying very hard to look dangerous," she said quietly. "But I see something else. I see my students, the ones who came to my dojo, pretending they didn't need help, pretending they weren't scared." And something flickered across Danny's face, something raw and quickly hidden, and Marcus, the leader, stepped forward, his jaw tight. "We don't need some old lady's pity," but his voice lacked conviction. And Margaret smiled, sad and knowing. "It's not pity," she said. "It's recognition. I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel like you're invisible, like the world has already decided who you are, and there's no point fighting it." And she didn't know why she was saying this, opening herself to strangers in an alley, except that the loneliness of the past 3 months had been suffocating. And maybe, just maybe, these broken kids could understand the kind of emptiness she carried. The standoff dissolved, not with threats or violence, but with uncertainty. The boys exchanging glances, and finally, Marcus shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem careless but wasn't. "Whatever, lady," he muttered, and they walked away. But Danny looked back once, his expression unreadable, and Margaret knew this wasn't over. And strangely, she didn't want it to be. Over the following days, she saw them around the neighborhood. Marcus, fixing a car in an alley with skill that suggested he'd once had dreams of being a mechanic. Sophia, Danny's older sister, Margaret learned working double shifts at the diner. Exhaustion etched in her young face. Danny himself sitting on a stoop, sketch pad in his lap, drawing with an intensity that spoke of talent and passion he probably had to hide from his friends, and slowly, a picture formed. These weren't monsters or criminals. They were casualties of a system that had failed them. Kids raising themselves, protecting each other the only way they knew how. And Margaret's heart, which she'd thought had closed forever when David died, began to ache with familiar purpose. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening when she found Danny in the community center's back lot, trying to punch a wooden fence post. His knuckles already bleeding, tears streaming down his face. And when he saw her, he didn't run or hide, just stood there, broken. He would have been 50 today, Danny said, voice raw. My daddy died in a construction accident 3 years ago, and everyone acts like I should be over it, like I should just move on and be the man of the house, but I don't know how. I don't know how to be anything. And Margaret's own grief rose up, recognizing its reflection in this boy's eyes, and she found herself saying, my husband died 3 months ago. We were together 46 years, and some days I don't know how to breathe without him. So no, you don't just get over it. You learn to carry it. And Danny looked at her. Rhea looked, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended age and circumstance, a recognition of shared pain. He taught martial arts, Margaret continued, not sure why she was sharing this. We both did. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about giving people tools to survive their own lives, discipline when everything felt chaotic, strength when they felt weak. And after he died, I thought that part of my life was over, but maybe. She trailed off, then met Danny's eyes with sudden clarity. Maybe it doesn't have to be this community center. Does it have an empty room? Danny blinked, confused. There's the old gym. Nobody uses it. Why? And Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Fragile but real. Because I'm going to teach again. And you're going to be my first student. What started as 1 boy in a dusty gym became 2, then 5, then a dozen. Word spreading through the neighborhood that the old lady in apartment to be was teaching something different. Something real. Not just kicks and punches, but meditation, discipline, respect, the philosophy that had guided Margaret's life. And the kids came, skeptical at first, testing her, waiting for the catch. But she asked nothing of them except presence and effort. And slowly, impossibly, they began to transform. Marcus, who'd spent 2 years angry at a world that offered him no legitimate path forward, discovered that his strength could be channeled into protection rather than intimidation, and he began walking younger kids home from school, his presence a shield against the real dangers of the neighborhood. Sophia joined too, finding in the discipline a respite from the exhaustion of raising her brother alone, her forms becoming meditation, her breathing exercises a way to manage the anxiety that had plagued her since their father's death. And Danny, angry Danny who'd been failing school and picking fights, began to draw again, sketching the forms Margaret taught, his art becoming a bridge between the traditional martial arts she loved and the modern world he navigated. And his grades slowly climbed as he found something to care about again. Margaret bloomed too, the purpose she'd thought was buried with David returning in a different form. And though she still cried sometimes, still reached for him in the empty bed and felt the crushing absence, the days had meaning again, structure, and these kids, who'd once surrounded her in an alley with mockery and hidden fear, had become her students, her purpose, maybe even her family. The test came 4 months after that first night, when a real gang, older and genuinely dangerous, tried to recruit Marcus, cornering him and 3 of Margaret's other students outside the community center, their offers thinly veiled threats. And Margaret, leaving the evening class, saw the fear in her students' eyes, the old patterns of violence and survival ready to reassert themselves. And she walked directly into the center of the confrontation, her small frame somehow commanding space, and said with quiet authority, "These students are under my protection," and the gang members, hard men who'd seen real violence, looked at this elderly woman with silver hair and weathered hands, and one laughed. "You gonna stop us, Grandma?" And Marcus's voice, shaking but clear, stepped beside her and said, "She's a 6th-degree black belt and a combat master. And she's taught us that real strength isn't about hurting people, it's about protecting them, about discipline and honor, and we're not interested in what you're offering." And the other students joined him, forming a line, not aggressive, but unafraid. And Margaret's heart swelled with pride so fierce it hurt, because this was what David and she had always taught, that martial arts wasn't about violence, but about the confidence to choose peace, the strength to walk away, the courage to protect without destroying. And the gang members, faced not with challenge, but with calm refusal, with unity and purpose they hadn't expected, eventually left, muttering threats that everyone knew were empty, because there was no victory in harming kids who'd already made their choice. The silence that followed was different from that first night in the alley. It wasn't shock or uncertainty, but shared triumph. And Margaret gathered her students, all 12 of them, these children who'd been strangers, who'd been lost, and said, "You honored everything I've taught you, everything David and I believed in, and I need you to know that you've saved me as much as I'd like to think I've helped you. You've given me a reason to wake up, to remember who I am beyond my grief, and whatever happens next, we face it together, as a school, as a family." And Danny, who rarely showed emotion anymore, wiped his eyes and said, "Sensei Margaret, my dad used to say that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up, who stays. And you showed up for us when nobody else did." And Sophia added, her voice thick with feeling, "You saw us when we were invisible." And Marcus, tough Marcus, who'd built walls so high around his heart, simply bowed deeply, the traditional sign of respect. And the others followed, and Margaret bowed back, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, because in this moment, in this dusty gym, in a forgotten neighborhood, she understood that purpose doesn't end, it transforms. That love doesn't die with the people we lose, it expands to embrace the people we find. And that David wasn't gone, not really, because everything he'd taught her, everything they'd built together, lived on in these kids, in this work, in the legacy of discipline and compassion that would ripple forward long after she was gone. 6 months later, the community center officially recognized Margaret's class, providing new mats, equipment, even a small stipend, and the local news ran a story about the elderly martial arts master transforming at-risk youth. Though Margaret hated that term because her students had never been at risk. They'd been under-resourced, overlooked, underestimated, but never without value, never without potential. And the attention brought more students, younger kids, parents seeking positive influences, even a few seniors who wanted to learn discipline and balance. And what had started in grief and chance became an institution, a genuine force for good in a neighborhood desperately hungry for hope. Danny earned a scholarship to art school, his portfolio full of martial arts sketches that told stories of transformation and strength. And on the day he left, he gave Margaret a drawing of her in Crane's stance, the image from that first night, and he'd titled it, "The Moment Everything Changed." And she hung it in the dojo beside a photo of David. 2 anchors of her heart, past and future intertwined. Sophia became Margaret's assistant instructor, her natural empathy and hard-won wisdom making her perfect for reaching new students who arrived angry and afraid, just as she once had been. And Marcus opened a small auto shop with a loan from a community organization, but he never left the coming 3 times a week to train, to help, to remind himself and others where he'd come from and what was possible when someone believed in you. Margaret Chen was 70 years old when she stood before her, Students now numbering 40 led them through forms she'd practiced for 50 years. Her body older, but her spirit renewed. And she thought about that night in the alley, how she'd been so broken, so lost. How those kids had seemed like a threat, but had actually been an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. How do you survive losing everything? And the answer, she now knew, wasn't survival at all, but transformation. You take your broken pieces, and you build something new. You take your pain, and you turn it into purpose. You honor what you've lost by giving what you've learned, and in the giving, you discover that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, but multiplies. That a heart shattered by grief can still hold infinite compassion. That endings and beginnings are often the same moment, viewed from different angles. And that sometimes the people we're meant to save are actually saving us, if only we're brave enough to let them. As the class ended and her students bowed, Margaret bowed back, and in the silence that followed, no longer the silence of shock or fear, but of respect, gratitude, and shared purpose, she finally felt what had eluded her since David's death: peace. Not because the grief was gone, but because it had found company in joy, in meaning, in the beautiful, unexpected family that had surrounded her in an alley one night and changed everything. And she whispered too quietly for anyone else to hear, "Thank you, David, for teaching me that love's greatest lesson isn't how to hold on, but how to let go and reach for what comes next." And somewhere deep in her healer's heart, she felt him smile.